Bryon Powell, welcome to the program. How's it going, buddy?
It's great. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Are you broadcasting from Silverton, Colorado?
Indeed. I'd say I could see the Hard Rock, but this time of year it moves, so I'd have to go around the corner to see it.
Everything is in walking distance and nearly in eyesight from your office there, probably. So
it is, and it's wonderful. Having lived in cities in the middle of the country and all sorts of different places, being in a small town where I can walk to the post office or the grocery store or anywhere within 7 minutes is pretty nice.
Pretty darn nice, man. Yeah, you guys have it made there in what is a very important and significant place in our little world. And Bryon Powell, you and I have known each other for a decade probably at this point, and you've probably interviewed me 100 times over the course of my career. And
seemingly, yeah.
I've had your wife and business partner, Megan Hicks, on the program once before to talk about her Nolan's 14 FKT. But this is the first time that I'm having the chance to interview you. And I have to say that I'm honored that you would give me the opportunity. And of course, I want to spend the bulk of our conversation talking about sort of the present and future of iRunFar. You all announced in January that you had been acquired by the All Gear Group within the Lola Digital Media empire. And, you're launching into a really exciting new chapter. But I'd love to, as I always do, start with the humble beginnings of the guests on the program. And, I, of course, know the story. I'm old enough and I've been in the sport long enough to remember when iRunFar was basically just your personal blog. So maybe for the listeners who are newer to the sport, talk a little bit about the early days of iRunFar. Where, even I'm curious about the domain name. Go back that far and talk about what it was at the beginning and paint the picture of those early days.
I mean, to go back to the domain name, I have to go back to when Gmail was invite only. And one of my roommates at the time was worked in politics and for political campaigns on a national level and whatnot. So he kind of knew the people in Google and whatnot. And it was when it was invite only, you could actually get a 6 character email address, and I happened to go with RunFar. I was like, it's memorable and easy. And I say RunFar, and people can type my email address.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I was studying for the bar exam in summer 2005 in Park City. Oh, it's 2006. Sorry. And I was sitting in Park City studying for the bar exam, figuring out whatever I could to not study for it, and ended up deciding that, hey, I'm going to register a domain and eventually maybe have an information source for ultrarunning, more thinking sort of race listings, maybe not just a pure race calendar, but more information about races. I played around with a little coding on the side. And anyway, runfar.com was taken.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, what do I do? That's so simple and easy, but all right, well, this was pre-iPhone. This is iPod days. I guess iMac. I'm like, what about iRunFar? Kind of lowercase I, just, it was partly that. And that also is an affirmational type phrase. It wasn't about me, Bryon Powell runs far, but
sure. Yeah.
iRunFar, it's whatever that distance is to you, to Megan, to most of your listeners, if that's 5K, 5 miles, 50 miles, you can identify and say, iRunFar.
Yeah.
So kind of rolled with that. I think it was only after that I started a personal running blog.
Yeah.
This was a thing back in the mid to late noughts. There were tens of thousands of them. It wasn't just Anton and you, but me as a Joe Schmo runner would just get on Blogspot and post about my training or a question I had about shoes or whatever.
Dude, I mean, what a fun time and fun part of the history of the sport when everybody was just interacting with each other on their Blogspot accounts. It's so funny now with the advent of social media and Instagram and the ease of just sharing information and interacting with people, to look back at, that's how we shared information with one another. And that's how I learned everything that I know about the sport, and how
sadly, a lot of it's getting lost.
Right.
I've thought longingly numerous times of how much I wish I could preserve Scott Jurek's old blog, or Chrissy Mails, or I don't know if your original one's probably gone by now. All of them have just kind of disappeared into the ether. And that was a way that we tracked the history of the sport at that time.
Yeah.
So
cool. Well, yeah, I love hearing about the domain things. I think I don't know if I've ever publicly admitted this, but I've probably spent, thousands of dollars on domain names myself. It's a favorite pastime of mine to search domains and buy them for the potential future use. That
I just sold most of mine. I had a number of park domains.
I actually
went with Lola. I kept two, BryonPowell.com and ifishfar.com.
Yes.
I'm like, no, you don't get that.
I actually talked to a domain broker today about listing some of mine. So anyway, we can move off that. But yeah, I mean, to talk a little bit more about the history, you were practicing law at the time that you started iRunFar. And, it's funny to register that domain and think about maybe turning into a race listing website. And then ultimately, after a decade of toiling, it becomes sort of the most important resource within our little subculture and our little sport. And I'm curious, just for people who are listening again, who don't know as much, sort of, at what point did it become kind of clear to you that this was going to be your path? Because I'm assuming it required you to leave a very steady, secure life as a practicing lawyer.
Yeah.
So talk about just taking that leap of faith and what that decision looked like at the time.
I mean, there's one intermediate step that I have to fill in there. And that's from going from the personal running blog to something in the direction of iRunFar today. I was at Wasatch 100 in 2007, and at an aid station waiting around for whoever I was going to be pacing, talked to a writer who was doing a freelance story for Runner's World. And eventually it turned out she was going to write this. And it was how to run your first ultra. And somehow we connected, and she got in touch after the race and was like, I want to interview you. So I prepared a bunch of notes for this. And in preparing for the bunch of notes, I do the interview, and then why don't I just type up these notes that I have, how to choose your first ultra and how to train for your first ultra, and just put that out there. And that was literally the first step to transforming it from just what am I running, what shoes am I running in, that kind of stuff, to trying to be an information source.
Yeah.
And that was a big leap in October of 2007. Between there and when I quit my job in May 2009, I just step by step, not necessarily intentionally, but kept going deeper. First, it was somebody at La Sportiva saying, oh, we'll send you, just let us know what shoes you want to test out and we'll send them to you. And then it was going to the Summer Outdoor Retailer Show in August of 2008, when I was still a full-time attorney. I took time off from work to go see what was at the show and write about it and learn. But as that time is going on, I met Megan in August 2008. And throughout this time, I'm 2 years into being an attorney, and it's stressful. I didn't get a lot of personal satisfaction about it. I was a regulatory attorney, not in courtrooms. I never wanted to do that. Yeah. But I'd write a memo, would go to the partner would send it to the client. I'd never hear about what turned out from that week of work and stress.
Yeah.
And so there was just not a lot of satisfaction there, and had a little bit of traction at iRunFar. But when I decided to take a big old leap, I had $100 a month coaching client. I didn't put ads on the site for another year plus.
Wow.
I made an intentional decision. I'm not putting ads on iRunFar, whether that was Google AdSense or selling ads, until it was something. I didn't want to have 100 or 200 page views or readers a week,
yeah.
Or not a week, a day, and monetize it. I was making iRunFar what it was, and I was going to do coaching. I just took a giant leap, said, "Hey, Megan, can I come move in with you outside of Yosemite in California?" We were flying back from the Marathon des Sables in Morocco. And that was kind of the week break I needed. Headspace. I talked with Michael Wardian, who was a good friend at the time, a lot over there, and talked to Megan, talked to others, and flying back decided, I'm going to give this a go. I kind of had two rules as I decided to quit. And one was, if at the end of 1 year, it was absolutely clear this was not going to work out, step away. And if at the end of 2 years, I couldn't see a path towards sustainability, I guess kind of on the financial side, whatever route that was to get there, that's fine. But if it wasn't going to work out, I got to move on. And I had a whole list of, I was doing freelance writing for like Trail Runner or Outside in various publications.
So you're just kind of piecing it together at first.
Adding more coaching on. I had a list of, do I lead guided tour runs in Yosemite? Do I put on camps? Do I put on races? Like all the things you can think about.
Dude, this is so inspiring to me.
I didn't know what that was going to be. Like I had a little bit of coaching income and that was it. And I mean, yes, I was an attorney, but I was an attorney less than 3 years out of law school who had just bought a house in Arlington, Virginia. Like, I think after I paid back my mortgage, I think I had like $5,000 in my wallet. And I spent the entire summer of 2009 living out of my Prius, driving around the mountain west of North America, going to races and events and meeting people. And that's how Relentless Forward Progress came out of a random dinner at the Outdoor Retailer Show that summer. Which
is, of course, your book, Relentless Forward Progress. Dude, I'm so inspired by this story. I figured that you had the vision more clearly mapped out when you took the leap of faith. It was a gigantic leap of faith. The leap of faith that created the sense of urgency to then create the vision. I love that. So
yeah, totally.
Any words of advice for people who may find themselves in a similar position with a steady job that offers a lot of security, but that doesn't necessarily provide that deep sort of personal satisfaction that you talked about with law? Like how, maybe any words of advice about sort of carving your own path with sort of an entrepreneurial project and pursuing?
I mean, the good news is you can always, like I did, I was publishing iRunFar at something similar to what it was those first couple of years that I did it full time before I did it full time, 2 years of writing during my lunch break or writing in the evenings or taking a long weekend to go to the Outdoor Retailer Show. I managed to do both. And to see what I enjoy there, to see, if before you start becoming a race director with a 10 series or 10 races in a series, just try organizing a local fat ass. You can dip your toe in the water. At some point you might make a full on leap. And that's probably the easiest way to grow quickly and to figure out if it is going to work or not in the end. But just dip your toe in the water. If you think you want to be a writer, write for some websites, write for, pitch Trail Runner, pitch ultra running, whatever it is. You don't have to go from 0 to 60. Give things that have interest to you a shot in little bits.
Start with the side hustle and then try.
It wasn't a side hustle back in the day, but that's what it would be today. Start with that, or help out with a race organization or whatever it is. Or maybe you become a member of, coastal running up in the Pacific Northwest or Rain Shadow or Aerovite, but maybe there was a way to work your way in.
So on this subject of entrepreneurship and getting your start, does that kind of come naturally to you, the whole entrepreneurial instinct?
Goodness, no.
So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about this as a sort of reluctant entrepreneur myself these days, who just kind of fell into something new that I'm really excited about and that I want to, sort of pursue with a lot of, energy and attention, but who lacks every other entrepreneurial instinct that you could have. Talk about your journey and maybe what skills were the hardest for you to develop on that front?
I mean, I'm an introverted, numbers guy, or math and science guy. That's where I fall. So the fact that basically a ton of my work is, not just with interviews and stuff, but it is outward facing, is, interacting with other people, is doing some degree of management. Like all of that is still outside my comfort zone. Like interviewing was shockingly stressful for a number of years. Like I would never have pushed myself in that direction, but I think Garrett Graubins was at Trail Runner magazine at the time when I was going to be at Leadville. And he's like, hey, can you interview, Anton and somebody else? And maybe it was Duncan Callahan. I forget who it would have been, but like, can you do a video interview with these guys? And if you can, like, well, we can give you, I don't know, $100 or whatever it was. Like, it was just a chance to, hey, somebody else had an idea. Yeah. You can borrow a video camera. I didn't own one. But just jump in there. And that was super nerve wracking. And it's become way more comfortable. Some interviews are still a challenge. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But that's usually for other reasons rather than like actual stress. But yeah, just becoming comfortable with that was a long journey.
Man, that's really interesting too, just because as a longtime iRunFar reader myself, those are the articles that I click on the most, that I definitely enjoy the most are the ones that include sort of an embedded YouTube video of pre-race interviews. And it's hilarious to hear that those are maybe the things that provided the most stress to you as you built this.
Yeah, it was definitely a huge factor of that. And I'm also really risk averse, just as a personality trait. Like I'm a low discounter. Like I value future things as much as the current. So, and I hate sales. Like I don't hate salesmen, but like that's not, you've heard me like come to you. Hey, Dylan, do you need some ads for Hypoxico? Like, I think that, and I just like, I'm not a salesman. So that's always been super hard. Like for probably a decade, I just sold enough in that, not just ads, but in the marketing partnership kind of space, just enough to get by because I hated it so much. But then I think it was like somewhere in 2018, a big deal like that I thought was a go fell through at the last minute, and there was no savings. It was like on the brink, like immediately. Yeah, wow. And I finally put me in the spot of like, as much as I dislike this, I've got to do a little bit more than just baseline so that if there is a hiccup, we're not gone like 2 weeks later. Because it was operating on that margin, like on that cusp for a decade, in part because of my own handicapping and my own extreme dislike of putting myself out there and trying to sell myself in the form of iRunFar. So that was a huge challenge.
Yeah. And I so identify with it as somebody who's worked in sales for a long time now. It's like, it is a skill that you have to develop. And for some people, for some personality traits, it doesn't feel comfortable to be in those situations. And it is a skill that you develop over time where you get better at it and you get more comfortable with it.
If you've gotten better at it, can you give me some tips?
Offline. We'll talk about it.
But like it's partially like the value, like maybe it was a little different in that like I had to value myself, and I always undervalued what iRunFar was doing. And now I have some people that bounce ideas off of, which I'm sure we'll get to, but like, wow, they always like, you're like, no, that should be double that price or whatever it is. Like I've just always lowballed, and then just the fear of rejection or the hatred of it that I just don't follow up or whatever it is.
Yeah. Dude,
so hats off to the salesman out there.
Yeah, 100%. And in this vein too, like with the sort of entrepreneurial spirit and the entrepreneurial struggle, there's some days where you're probably just kind of like possessed with the confidence that you're on the right path, that iRunFar is growing at X amount and we're on to something. We're providing an incredible service to the community. And then there's probably other days where you feel like you're completely wasting your time and you're doomed to failure. How do you navigate that cycle? Those peaks and valleys of
it's a lot of riding the wave of fear, honestly. Just like trying to always, a positive or a pillar of strength has been always feeling like I was doing or trying to do the right thing. Like there have been little things that I might've tweaked or changed along the way. Like you're never 100% and, looking back, but always felt like I've been trying to do the right thing and only would do the right thing. And if I had to compromise in certain areas that I would just walk away. Like it would never be worth that. And having that confidence was always great. But in terms of like, I've also never, I mean, maybe in 2007 was looking at the traffic on a regular basis, but for a decade now, I haven't looked at iRunFar's traffic that way, and never have gone the direction of clickbaity stuff or publishing articles that would, be controversial to get clicks, or just chasing the biggest star or the most important race. Like, it's always, is there competitive depth at this event? Like, who is actually most likely to be on the podium this race that we should interview? And, maybe the stars at the race and not, they're injured and they don't have a chance. Like, okay, like, yeah, we're going to do what we think is right. So having really, the doubts have been on can I deal with the stress of surviving day to day, and the stress of, can I survive financially, supporting myself and then Megan and myself for a very long period of time. Never really worried that, there was less viewership at this year's Le Templier or this other race where at Run Rabbit Run, and maybe it gets less attention. Like, never even give that two looks.
Good. Yeah. I mean, that's a good lesson too. Yeah. Instead of like focusing on the metrics and the potential, maybe like the superficial signals of success, to be focused more on the quality and the depth and doing what's right. It's beautiful.
And that's the hard path to go down these days. And
yeah, I'm sure, especially when that deal falls through in 2018 and you're staring potential failure in the face. I bet it's tempting to then go the opposite direction, but you guys have done such an amazing job, and it's been so cool to be a longtime reader and to just see the journey that you've been through. And with sort of the stuff that I'm working on now too, to just kind of get inspiration from you guys and to know that our sport is worth this sort of commitment and this,
and it's been the commitment. Like, that's been plenty of times at that verge of failure is like, this is, and something I feel like I am giving to the community. Like, if I wanted to go do something lucrative or make money or live the dream, it wouldn't be this. Like, there's a lot of 70-hour weeks at the computer, and then there's 90 to 100 hours in a race week. Like, it's a full on gig and always challenging. But it's interesting in that just sort of hearing you talk about your, going into this direction and the challenges in that. I think I forget if it was spring or summer 2018 when that deal fell through, and I'm like, is iRunFar going to survive this next couple months? I mean, Megan and I sat down that autumn and kind of went, took like a retreat. I took a personal retreat for like 2 or 3 days, mapped out the pros and the cons and of doing iRunFar, and what the stressful aspects of it were and what can change and all these different things. And then Megan and I sat down and literally came up with a list of things. And one of the options that came on the table is, if X, Y, and Z, if we don't make X, Y, and Z change and it doesn't change, like, it's time to hang things up. Like, we can't go super into debt. We can't like keep wrecking ourselves as we are and have been for a decade at that point for me almost. And like, that's kind of an important lesson, I think, for an entrepreneur, is being willing to assess and know when you would walk away. Whether that was me at a year or two and having those limits then, or reassessing when things just weren't working personally and financially in 2018, being like, all right, I got to reevaluate. And one of the options is folding
the tent. Wow.
And like, it would have been heartbreaking in so many ways,
of course,
but like, it was an option.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling the community wouldn't have stood for that.
Probably not.
But I mean, it's really fun to talk about. And I think obviously one of the things I'm really interested to explore with you is sort of the present and now the future of iRunFar. Of course, in January, you guys announced that you had been acquired by the All Gear Group, part of Lola Digital Media. And at the time I messaged you and said, hey guys, if you want to talk about this, just what it means for iRunFar and the future, let me know. I'd love to host the conversation. And you politely said, right now is we're still trying to figure it out ourselves, but I'll let you know when the time is right. And here we are now, 6 months later, and I'm really excited and honored that you would come and have this conversation with me.
Yeah. I was thankful that you graciously accepted that. Let's pause, and that you also accepted just after Hard Rock. I reapproached you and said, hey, like things take time, and things are actually now at the cusp of happening, that we can actually talk about something real rather than what we hope will happen.
Great. Well, let's get to that in a sec. But before we do, obviously, like I said, you announced this in January, and I'm assuming then that sort of the due diligence and negotiations and the stuff were happening sort of in the middle of COVID. So I kind of wanted to try and understand what the COVID year was like for you and the iRunFar team, and like what were the challenges, and how did it impact your business, and sort of at the same time, when were these conversations happening and in what context?
I mean, things changed March, like hardcore 2020. I went and covered Trans Gran Canaria.
I was there. I was there. Remember? Yeah.
I almost didn't go. I remember like last minute, like I had a shared room through the race organization. Like, nope, I'm getting whatever it costs. I'm getting my own room. And then like we got out like 2 days before the border closed. I mean, U.S. citizens could get back in, but like things locked down. But it went from like that's late winter through like March or time when iRunFar is building kind of annual, year-long brand partnerships with our bigger partners, whether that's any of the major shoe and apparel companies. Because we usually work on them on a year-round or year-long basis. So a lot of the deals that we did have already worked out. A number of them were cut in half or pulled back entirely. Anything that was still kind of in the finalizing stage just was like, nope, not happening. So we went from being on pace for a normal or a good year to all of a sudden looking at half of our normal revenue and with no likelihood of having anything else come in through the year. And then even we had some campaigns that were just about to launch, and due to shipping, like Patagonia was amazing. They had basically a month-long homepage takeover, a number of other elements to a pretty big deal. And then I was like, we launched it, and 2 days later, they're like, we just shut our warehouses down. Like, we're not shipping for, we don't know how long. Let's pause this. And they paused it till this year, but amazingly came through and actually paid in like spring 2020, and was just like an amazing bridge that we made right this year. But like holy moly, that can keep us afloat for a couple months.
Wow.
But it was hard because, like I said, in general, revenue got slashed in half. We kind of, for a long time, have thought of iRunFar as two pieces. There's what we like to think of as the magazine mix of content on iRunFar on a daily basis. It's the educational articles, it's the philosophical articles, all that stuff, which we This Week in Running, and more or less we could continue with that, except for This Week in Running, through all of 2020, and we dedicated ourselves to that. But the other half is the race coverage, and that just evaporated. And we took a pretty conservative stance in terms of safety and whatnot, in terms of returning to that. But that was gone for the rest. We covered one race in 2020, and we're confident with that being the right choice for us. But it was a hard one. But not only we do get some sponsorship for covering the biggest races from brands, but also just in terms of reader excitement, reader support. Like a couple years ago, I think coming out of 2018, we added Patreon, which has been a huge source of support for iRunFar, and evening out some of those big up and down cycles. Having that pledged monthly support was and still is huge for us. But for that first, I mean, that's kind of the initial crisis, is that March, like things just get clawed back or canceled. So we try to immediately just scramble. I mean, basically scrambled March through June, trying to make new things work, try to make new sources of revenue, whether that was through virtual races or coming up with a bunch of like apparel and other swag to sell, and just worked ourselves to the bone.
But I'm interested about the context in which these negotiations probably started, because it was a very uncertain time for you. And did that influence your guys' decision?
Well, the interesting thing is, amazingly, and to Lola's media's credit, we got approached I want to say early to mid-November. It was that far into this, and never was it from a position of like their strength and our weakness. It was never, you guys are in COVID. You like every other media company's got to be struggling. Here's a low ball. No, it was somebody I knew and respected whose website had been acquired. And he came to me and said, "Hey, do you have any interest in talking about, possibly being acquired?" And I'm like, "Sure. Yeah. I've known you for a decade."
So this is November of 2020 and the deal closed in January of 21.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
It was 2 months, a fairly busy 2 months. So like most of that, like the first month was like kind of just back and forth, like increasingly like, just broad spitballing of concepts for a couple of weeks, and then getting closer to, hey, let's, talk about broad strokes of what might work, to a lot of due diligence. Wow. Holy moly. Yeah. I remember like that taken up a lot of time.
I'm sure. So what is Lola Digital Media, and what's the All Gear Group? And maybe talk a little bit about them.
I think it's I want to say about 70 employees right now. They own about 15 websites. I'd say they're based in the Twin Cities, but it's more or less completely virtual. That's probably where the core of sort of the corporate team is. And GearJunkie is .com is one of the sites in the group, and the biggest site, and they were founded out of the Twin Cities as well. So a bunch of GearJunkie employees up there. And within Lola, there's two silos in Lola. There's one that's lifestyle, anything from soap operas to pet gear to K-pop is in that silo. And then there's the All Gear Group, which is GearJunkie, Explorers Web, which focuses on high alpine mountaineering and expedition type stuff. There's Bike Rumors. So kind of there's Gear Hungry, which is kind of a generalist gear site, but sort of a general outdoor silo of which iRunFar is a part. So it's kind of,
So what value do you think they saw in the sport and in iRunFar? And similarly, what value did you guys see in them? Was there a period where you felt each other out to see if it was a cultural fit? Were you scrutinizing the people within the organization to make sure you?
Yeah, I think so. My contact there was Stephen Reginald. He is the GearJunkie who eventually became the founder of GearJunkie.com. He did syndicated columns before that for newspapers. But I've known him for a really long time, and just having his candid take on things really helped. Just kept chatting with them a little bit about culture, about how we could grow iRunFar. I mean, a problem for Megan and I has always been, like, we basically ended up capping ourselves at 2 employees, somewhat intentionally. Like, we didn't want to do growth just for growth's sake. And we thought with how much we were doing, we really couldn't manage employees on the writing editorial side, although we have a team of writers, don't get me wrong, but to have kind of staff, we just didn't feel we were in a position to. But kind of almost as importantly, if you're a 2-employee company and you hire one, you've just increased your staffing 50%, but you've also increased maybe not your cost 50%, but your salary 50%. And it's just a big integral leap rather than, going and covering one more race or hiring a writer to write one more column a month. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge leap for a very small publication. Whereas if Lola wants to add somebody, that's 1% of their employee base, or 1.3%, whatever it is. Like, it's super small. Seeing an organization like that, there's economies of scale, and all those have more of those. I'm looking forward to them building out, but transferring sales stuff, transferring ad operations, transferring web development, transferring invoicing, transferring just a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. I mean, to some of the social media, some of that's done by somebody on their staff now. Yeah. But that's all stuff that Megan, a lot of that's operations type stuff as I've done for the entirety of iRunFar. And there was a hope in my mind of being able to over time offload that and spend at least some more time I mean, for me, if I could fill in like an extra day a week, it would be looking at iRunFar big picture, making editor-in-chief type decisions in terms of new directions to go, where to expand, how to make things better, which I've just not had the bandwidth for most of the past decade. It's
right. So I want to talk. I want to talk more about that, like sort of what are the benefits of joining Lola. But before we do, I'd love to sort of hear a little bit more about the 2 months that it took to sort of come to this conclusion that this was the right way to go for you guys, because it's been a 10+ year journey for you, toiling away on this passion project that turned into this media juggernaut at least within our little subculture. Was it a hard decision for you? Was there a temptation to stay independent, or did this feel like a no-brainer path forward?
And to be honest, in a lot of ways, it felt like a no-brainer. Like, I don't know how much longer Megan and I could have operated it independently. Like, it just takes so much. Like, I think people think it's hyperbole of me working like 50 to 70 hour weeks on a regular basis. That's what I work every week. And Megan's pretty much the same. And that's not including, I mean, I probably averaged 80 hours a week from mid-June through a couple days after Hard Rock. Like, it's just doing amazing things, but it's
nonstop.
It's exhausting. So I just don't know how just Megan and myself would have been able to sustain that for, not ad infinitum, that's for sure. And I just don't know when that would have been. So figuring out ways to get,
as a no-brainer, we all have these moments in our life when it just feels like the universe just gives us kind of like what we need at the time that we need it. Did it feel like that? It
was. I mean, in a lot of ways, yes. Cause it was like, it wasn't us having to go sell out of some position of weakness. It was somebody I knew who just approached it as a conversation. When we did start talking, sort of numbers, as it were, like, it was never, let's look at your 2020 numbers. No, it was like, 2019 was your last real year. Like, let's talk about that. It was never, so that always felt just comfortable. And then, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Like, we knew in selling iRunFar that there would be changes, and some, like, we would in the end not have 100% control. Like, I feel like I still have 98+% control on a day-to-day basis, if not more. Like, it's super hands off. If not as getting advice, but it's still like, here's something I built from a personal blog on Blogspot to, getting my own domain to like literally coding a theme at some point. Like, it's so much of my identity. I mean, I look out the front and see my iRunFar car. Like, so like it was hard, and, just almost fear of what others would think, like in the community. Like, that community means so much to us, from like our close friends to supporters on Patreon to like the ultra running as a whole world as a whole. Like, did you get any criticism of like, oh, you guys have sold out?
Nope. Good. Thank goodness.
And to be totally transparent, we had, as things were going down, we got a lot of counsel kind of from like the Lola team to like, hey, like, let's just do this softly. Like, let's just, which is fine. It's one way to do it.
That's why you didn't come on my podcast immediately afterwards.
No. We put a post out. We put an article out immediately.
I know.
Saying, here's what it is. And we're very candid about it. And I mean, some people are going to hate iRunFar for whatever we do. Like, there's the small group of that. No, it's been very supportive and understanding. And
well, dude, I mean,
like magic. I don't know how it happened.
Well, when you made the announcement, I mean, I was totally surprised. I mean, not surprised in that, like, oh, this seems unreasonable, or like, I don't know. I was just sort of like, wow, like, what a cool illustration of the progress in our sport, of Bryon and Megan, who've given so much, finally sort of like having an opportunity to offload some of the hard work, to be rewarded for the work that they put in over the last decade. And, you did put up a post sort of announcing this acquisition, announcing this change. And in that post, you sort of said, here's sort of why this makes sense for us. And here are the benefits that we anticipate coming about as a part of this partnership with Lola. And part of that is adding new staff. And you just recently announced introduced the new editor, Alex Potter. You did a fun little interview introducing her in Silverton around Hard Rock. So talk a little bit about that part of things. You said that for a long time you capped it as a 2-person business, you and Megan, even though you have a big network of writers who do contribute, but you've added a new employee now officially in Alex Potter. Talk about her and sort of like, what does she bring to the team? And if there's more plans to expand the team.
Yeah, she's amazing. I mean, I guess whether it was in kind of the negotiations or in the first kind of like editorial meetings with the Lola staff, once iRunFar came on board, adding some staff was always kind of on my wish lists. I probably would have been like, let's do it at week 1. But everything takes time. And eventually, I kind of convinced some of the staff that it really wasn't out of a place of necessity. Like Megan and I were both still working way too hard. And one of the places that I saw that we could change that was with hiring a new editor. And we eventually convinced, some of the staff that that's a good idea. And we went out and got a couple great candidates with a total variety of backgrounds. There was a gentleman who had a lot of experience as an editor at running publications. There was a woman with a bunch of great people skills that would have sort of fit in the middle. And then there's Alex Potter, who just had an incredible life kind of story since college. She has a nursing degree, then went over to Yemen to do journalism, like photojournalism. Ended up being in Iraq doing journalism as well. While she's over there, she founds a medical response nonprofit to literally operate like just behind the lines of fighting for civilians. Came back, ended up doing a couple years of wildlands firefighting. And just has a ton of energy. Like that was a huge part of bringing Alex onto the team, and her fearlessness, which seems silly in the context of ultra running, but like just something I could be confident that if she goes and covers a Trans Gran Canaria, I can pass your phone number on to her and she can text you after the race to set up an interview. But someone who's just going to like go elbow Pau Capet or Luis Alberto Hernando and like somehow through a translating app, like set up an interview and find a translator, like no problem. She's done this in war zones. Like she'll make it happen. Which I think is just crucial. And that she's also not going to fear working all night covering. She joined us before she even started officially at Western States and covered Hard Rock. And she's done so many overnight nursing shifts and still taking critical care of people while having been up for a day plus, that I have like supreme confidence that she can handle doing that interview the next morning after being up all night, which is a difficult skill.
Sure. It's great description of having people who may on paper have better qualifications to come into an editor role, but having the more unique experience. I mean, obviously she's worked in journalism but she has more of this fearlessness and a desire to learn and a lot of energy. So that's really fun. Is there plan to potentially expand the team further? I know obviously we are still early in this whole new chapter of iRunFar, but how do you foresee that?
There's talk of it. It's a matter of what comes about. For a couple months, there was talk of an iRunFar sales rep to take kind of all the marketing sales off my plate.
That sounds like it would be highly valuable for you.
That would be. That has disappeared, as happens. Like things come and go. There were some good reasons that it didn't happen. But there's now talk of other sort of filling at least a couple roles in sort of more of the gear related side of iRunFar, maybe staffing up there, whether it's temporarily or long term. I don't know, but that could be built out. I mean, Alex is going to move. She basically works with Megan. Megan is, for those who don't know, Megan is the managing editor, and she tends to do the day-to-day editing of the actual pieces, but also organizing that with the writers and interfacing with them. Whereas I do a ton of essentially stuff on the operations side when it's not me writing an article or doing race coverage. So Alex will be helping out with Megan. I could see other staff being kind of under that editorial umbrella. There's not a lot of like somebody who could just step in and do a large part of what I do through one hire.
Yeah.
I could see that just be a slower, like various parts of Lola taking parts of whether it's paying our writers or invoicing or ad sales or
sales.
I've been uploading the ads into Google's ad manager for the last decade. Now I actually just send it over to somebody and they take care of it. And I pop in every once in a while to make sure things are running smoothly, but it's awesome. I guess my point is there's lots of little tasks that I'll hand off to different people over time.
Cool.
Whereas Megan is it's one big step with Alex kind of coming under her wing and working together.
Awesome.
But I think on the gear side would probably be the next place we'd have maybe a full-time hire.
Cool. So, obviously, like it's not only the growth of the team, but you're trying to grow the business now under this new leadership. You're trying to innovate and sort of move into the future of a sport that is growing really rapidly and that has been for the duration of your time working on iRunFar. How does this potentially impact the business model of iRunFar? Is there anything that you can disclose about sort of what you hope to roll out in the future with the sport of Lola?
I mean, I think a lot of it is just overcoming me being a stubborn dummy in a lot of ways. Like, I think way back in the early 2010s, I had like some affiliate links for if somebody's buying something out of a review. And I just didn't do it for, 6, 7, 8 years, partially because of some high level, like ideals or something. And I'm like, I'm not going to change what we write in a review. It's like, I'm just going to put it now. There's just a link in there. And if there's a note saying, if you buy through this link, you support iRunFar. And if you don't, you don't. Like, I just think it as
this is a really interesting thing that maybe you can expand on, right? Like the balance between staying true to your values, quote unquote, and making it work as a business, right? And, so basically what you're referring to now is like, if you click on a link and buy something as part of a review that's published on iRunFar, you get some sort of small commission based on that. So It's an easy way for people who are listening to the show right now to support iRunFar, to support the mission, to support the sport in general. But if you can expand on that a little bit more about that maybe tension of keeping your values or not appearing as a quote unquote sellout, but also like,
it wasn't even like the sellout. It's just like, could there be anybody perceiving any change and any bias on anything? Right. And like I just always erred like 100% in the direction of like eliminating any perception of anything. And it's just silly because like, that's just not going to change what iRunFar does. Like if you ever watched who we interview at races, it is never anything to do with who's sponsoring our coverage of that race. Like we flat out, like we've had brands ask, and I like politely to say, no, just because you're supporting our coverage of X race doesn't mean that's who we're going to interview. We're going to interview who, like we have complete editorial control and discretion. End of story. And if you don't like that, I understand, like we can not work together.
Sure.
Like, so it's, I don't know, like it was me being kind of foolhardy and just being idealistic it wasn't even idealistic to an extreme. It's just just going to an extreme and staying there. Yeah. And maybe not even to any end or any purpose at that point. Like,
so are there any bigger visions that you can share? And I totally understand if, there's a lot of things that I'm sure you guys are thinking about that you're not ready to talk about at this point, but any other things that you want to share with the listeners who are all rabid iRunFar readers and fans of the sport, of things that you guys think you can achieve as part of this new chapter of iRunFar?
I mean, I think there's some pretty obvious ones. I'm just making a note so I don't forget any of them. One is we just rolled out a new mobile theme. Completely, before it was kind of done through a plugin that was compliant with Google's AMP procedures, which make for really fast mobile websites. But there was a lot of glitches, and it was pretty awful. And I basically just used a canned theme that was included in that plugin. Like, didn't even bother changing the colors of the buttons or whatever. And we just rolled out yesterday afternoon a full new mobile theme, along with a new commenting platform, Discuss, which is a pretty standard one across the internet, but it kind of plays well on mobile in a lot of ways. With that launched, there'll be little kinks we're working out here and there on that, but we're going to next be working on a new theme for the desktop. I haven't seen the latest build, but I should be taking a look at that this week. I don't know if it'll roll out before UTMB or not, but like those are two big things, and I just didn't have the bandwidth or the people to make that happen. And I just behind the scenes with them redoing that, it'll just fix some like just little broken things that have accumulated over the years, whether that's truly broken or just things that slow down iRunFar. So it just should be a better overall experience for our web users. Kind of on an area that I don't know why. I don't know if I had avoided it. I think I had, but just buyer's guides, like kind of diving deep into a certain category of equipment. And it's something that I did way back at the beginning of iRunFar. And we had a couple people do it less concertedly in some roundups of some product categories, but just kind of leaning into those buyer's guides. I wrote one on like best trail running shoes, and it's kind of a generalist article at this point. But then Craig Randall, we just published his best men's running shorts article. And it's just a great selection of different men's running shorts that tend toward the trail and ultra side of things. And it's just like, it's super useful. Like, why would we not publish that? And I'm looking up at like 25 wind jackets and like 20 rain jackets that if I find some more time to go running, like I'll be rolling out buyer's guides in those areas, and like using a decade and a half of being immersed in the sport and the product in the sport and writing about it. Like, sweet. Like, why wasn't I doing this? Great. Or why wasn't iRunFar doing this? And then excitingly, I have wanted to do for about the past decade is kind of have more newsy articles, like with the iRunFar's magazine mix of content, as we call it, and race coverage. We just haven't had any bandwidth to put out shorter, timely news articles. Sort
of like the one you guys published about the new golden ticket races this week.
Exactly. And sometimes it might be something simpler, like our Badwater 135 results article was not our typical results article, but we categorize that as news. A gentleman died in a runner out in Yosemite, and we covered that. To something that just doesn't warrant a full-on in-depth article, but is really interesting, like Dakota Jones's sort of environmental / trail running camp, and then Killian having his foundation having sort of similar one over in Europe. And we had a joint article on that. And I think that in some ways could be not like introducing a particular shoe model, but if the North Face came out with an entirely new, replaced Better Than Naked, and had a full new capsule of apparel that included something as new as Future Light, like maybe having a news article on that. Like it would never sell itself as a review. It's like, here's this new thing that's getting out there. I don't know. There's lots of ideas like that. And I've wanted that for a decade, but it's just bandwidth. And now within All Gear, they have a newsroom. It's something, I mean, I think when I was onboarding iRunFar into Lola, I'm like, we'd love to have more newsy content. And then somehow multiple pieces came together within All Gear, and we're like, all right, we're making an All Gear newsroom.
Sweet.
And so,
well, that's great, man. And all those ideas are articles that I would certainly like to read, and that I think there's a huge appetite for in the sport. But it does take people. It takes bandwidth. And, you sort of referenced this or alluded to this many times in our conversation so far, but just having the support of Lola offloads a lot of responsibilities from you and Megan. So you can think a little bit more creatively. Has that given you like a rejuvenated sense of energy? Have you been able to access
every time I think about thinking about that, it does. It's like meta level still. Like I had like just coming out of Western States and hard rock coverage. Like there was a ton of just literal translation of like, here's our passwords. Here's, getting contracts for each of our writers. Like that was a couple months. And I feel like we're getting to the point where come fall, I can really dedicate more time to those. And I think Lola honestly wants myself and Megan to sit down and like think of what those big picture things are. Like what new columnists do we bring on? Like, do we get Dylan Bowman to write a monthly profile on elite runners for us? Cause if you want to, let's talk.
Are you offering me a job right now?
I'm offering you a column if you want one.
have Lola call my people and we'll see if we can work it out.
All right. No, I don't want to put you on the spot. That's off the cuff. They want to like seriously, Megan and I to think about, little things like a particular column, but also, bigger iterations, like not even just new area, like stuff like adding newsroom or buyer's guide, but like, do we push in, like, do we include more stuff in road running or not? Or do we do we do more race coverage that's remote, like that we're not actually on site for? Like just, there's lots of areas for us to consider. And I probably have 2 pages in a Google Doc of like just single bullet point ideas that I just need to sit down and prioritize and think about.
Mm-hmm.
Hasn't happened. Maybe after UTMB.
Yeah, right. That's coming up. It'll be here before we know it. So
indeed.
A few more questions for you. One of the things I'm really curious about is just kind of like the feeling of when this actually became a reality, like when the deal closed. What did it feel like? Did it feel like you had reached a finish line of a decade-long journey, or was it more like a critical aid station along, I
think it's a critical aid station. Right? I mean, like, the easiest analogy is, just like it would be a card game. It's taking some chips off the table. Because like every year, if you're a super small business, like you're gambling, do you stay in business? And we were on that scale. You're always riding that line to some degree. Mm-hmm. And it almost happened in 2018-19. It could have happened in 2020 if we hadn't joined Lola and 2021 had been more like 2020. Like iRunFar wouldn't be here today. I mean, we would have made a last talk to our, supporters out there and see what we could have figured out. But like, it's a gamble every year and it could all go away in some, like, I mean, for a decade, there's probably 8 years I didn't have health insurance and 10 years where I didn't put anything away toward retirement, and taking a little bit off the table means we can put a little away toward that, like that I wasn't doing for a decade. So it just kind of, it doesn't.
Dude, I'm so glad you mentioned that.
It kind of like equals out, I guess. Like
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I mean, that's a huge sacrifice to make. You had a stable career as a lawyer. You would have had a nest egg saved for retirement. The fact that you toiled away on iRunFar for 10 years without giving yourself health insurance or saving for your own future, and then to finally get to a point where there's a bigger company who recognizes that hard work, that recognizes the value that you provide to your readers and says, hey, let's reward you for all those sacrifices and all those risks. It must feel really nice. It must feel good.
I mean, that's a good way to think about it. I basically got paid back for a decade of benefits I didn't receive.
And also, just some security and some, some reward.
Like I said, like it takes that, not only does it like, sort of equalize things out a little bit in that regard, but it just reduces that risk going forward. Like Megan and I are still employees and still, still awesomely have more or less the same exact roles we did when we were doing iRunFar independently. And like there's just not a whole lot of top down directives. It's a lot of like going to people for counsel or bouncing ideas off people and in the best way. Like,
and that's probably part of the reason why this felt like a no brainer to you. Rather than,
and that's actually another, like I really needed to focus on that point is, I mean, for a decade plus, like first me and then Megan and myself, like we're operating in a vacuum, like making every decision by ourselves for the most part. Like, I don't know. I never worked at a magazine or a newspaper or another website, like whether it's on the technical side or on the editorial side or whatever it is, every time it's making it up as you go along in a vacuum. And now I can go to the editor-in-chief at Switchback Travel or Bike Rumor or Explorers Web or Gear Junkie. And there's some people that have been another of other editors at those publications, and just talk to them, like give them my ideas, get their ideas. Like, oh, I've got this challenge. Like, what did you do when you had that challenge? Mm-hmm. As well as technical specialists in various areas too. So like, it's just that was the idea of working, to crystallize it, the idea of working with other people collaboratively in that same kind of position and in a similar space, like, was really attractive.
Yeah.
After a decade in a silo.
Yeah. A little moral support, a little experience to, guide your own decision-making. It's really cool. Totally. So I want to talk a little bit about your partnership with Megan, and working with your life partner, your wife as well. My wife and I do it too. And there's definitely been a learning curve, but it's a really cool thing. So I wanted to maybe give you an opportunity to talk about how your guys' skill sets complement one another, and what do you do to ensure that your work stress doesn't impact your deeper partnership together?
I don't know. I'd probably ask advice from you on that. No, it's an ongoing challenge. Like, I don't know that it ever gets easier. I mean, I think in some ways, recognizing our own needs is important in that sort of situation, in terms of knowing when one of us is going to be upset by something and the other being either supportive or stepping away, depending on how that person reacts. Sometimes just being able to take some of that flack and just know that that's not how the other person feels about you as a life partner, but it's just blowing off some steam or is being critical about a particular nuance of a website, whatever, when they're just having a bad day at work. Like, So it's just a lot of letting that go. I've tried to get better about, it's easy to only share what goes wrong or what the challenges are or the stressful points. But I'll literally go like, hey, Megan, like, this article did really well. I don't even look at that. So I'm just trying to think of like an example, but like some concrete thing. We got a number of small, like one-time donations during Western Station Hard Rock coverage. Yeah. And it took me a little while to reply to all of those. And I did personally, like, anybody who got one of those, that's me on a keyboard.
Yeah.
But a couple of them that had personal notes, or I wrote them and then they sent a personal note back, I forward those, or BCC Megan a lot of times, just like, here's somebody saying something nice about iRunFar, like sharing the little wins, sharing the little pieces of moral support is nice.
I love that. It's so good. It's like, so good.
Just like it's easy to, you're only maybe working to solve or working against the stressful points, but like, make sure you flash those little bits of happy.
I love that. Yeah. Making sure you do celebrate the wins and not only,
and it's good for yourself too. Like, I've forever kept a little like Google tab. I don't know if it's not a folder, but I guess it's a tag. Yeah. That's like iRunFar good. And like when I don't know the last time I looked at it, but like, it's way easier to see the piece of criticism on social media or a comment or whatever. And you just got to remember, like, if I need to, I can just go back and look at that folder with, 100 and 1,000 good things, and just know that, like, don't let that one negative voice bring you down. Cause that's been one of my own personal challenges through iRunFar is letting a troll get to me.
Totally. Yeah. Dude. So I also want to talk about we've already sort of alluded to this, but it's been a sacrifice, right? And you guys provide a service to a community, but it comes at your expense sometimes, your and Megan's expense sometimes. For example, you didn't run Hard Rock this year. You were in Hard Rock.
And the conditions were so good. You were so lucky. You have any idea?
Were so good. But I think this is important for listeners to really appreciate is, you and Megan has too, for much of the last decade, sort of put your own enjoyment of the sport, your own competitive goals on the back burner to provide a service to the community. And I'm actually reading a book right now that my Red Bull manager gave me just a few days ago. And as I go through my own sort of personal renaissance right now, and it stresses sort of the importance of sort of leading a life of service instead of asking how you can get ahead in your career, how you can make more money, how you can get to the next level. It's more about how can you have an impact and how can you lead a life of service, and then hopefully that gives you enough to survive, but also a much deeper satisfaction about who you are. And so I wanted to first recognize you guys for doing that for the community for such a long time.
Thank you.
But also maybe give you a little chance to complain about it too, if you want to, about,
I can think of a couple of sacrifices. I mean,
yeah.
It was multifactorial, but when Megan and I both got into hard rock for this year, we knew only one of us could run it. Like we've done it twice before where we've run it and had race coverage, but we knew that just was that was not the right move anymore. And originally it was going to be me running it and a lot of life getting in the way, but for someone needing to do iRunFar, I would have gone out and struggled my way around the course at the very least. But Megan was in a better position to take advantage or to use that spot to its fullest. So I, 100% graciously and I'm stoked that Megan got to run hard rock. But it definitely on race day when conditions were aligning to be amazing, it was definitely a little hard to be there and not with a bib on. But I also, it kind of struck me I was out at Western States and picked up one of the Western States little magazines. I don't know what they call it, but sort of the yearly program. Yeah, there you go. And looked back, and way back in 2005 and 6, there's the listing of under or 20 to 29 champion or under 29 and under champion. And I'm listed there twice. And I look at the names and it's, Jurek and Mike Mason and Torrance and, all the guys that have come, Killian, I think was in there, and what and I'm not trying to say I was ever going to be as fast as them, but when I moved out to California, I kind of had a 5-year plan of I'd have enough space with iRunFar to slowly and incrementally over a couple of years go from what I'd run just under 1930 at Western States. I thought maybe that could be an 18-hour-ish. I'm not saying I'm not running 16 low. I'm not breaking 16, but yeah, just to slowly work up to what my potential was. And iRunFar, and that was not compatible.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of not regret, but there's a little bit of I did sacrifice that chance in order to do iRunFar to its fullest. And same with I never really focused on a road marathon. My PRs from a Western States training run during law school exams, who knows maybe I was a 240 marathoner or could have been, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I sacrificed my 30s, which probably as a distance runner and ultra runner, quite possibly your best. And I could prepare well for a single race, but I could never allow myself to train, consistently enough through a whole year and then over multiple years to maybe challenge and find out what that final limit was.
Yeah. But, well, thank you for making the sacrifice. Thank you for making the sacrifices, honestly, on behalf of the sport. I mean, I can speak for a generation of runners who learned half of what I know about the sport through your articles and, whose career has benefited from my exposure to what you've provided. And I think it's important to acknowledge when people do provide a service and do make sacrifices in service of a greater.
And there's lots of them in ultra running. I mean, there's a lot of folks who've done this for decades, race directors, even volunteers, spouses. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many people behind the scenes that who give behind the scenes unendingly. And yeah. Hopefully they also can get some of what they want out of the sport in terms of enjoyment.
Yeah. Is there anything that we've missed that we haven't talked about as part of what you foresee as iRunFar's next generation and the next chapter as part of this Lola acquisition? And if not, maybe in closing, let's just talk about what's next for you. Do you have anything coming up personally, athletically, and then also where can we expect iRunFar in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything, I mean, outside of those things I laid out, nothing that's concrete enough to say. Again, I hope to at some point in the fall sit down and maybe have a retreat or spend some time and just go through and think of what those next ideas and avenues are for iRunFar. And like I said, I've compiled a list over the years, and now I just need to find the time to do it. And personally, I wish I could say I had something on the calendar, but I fought it for a while in the spring when I was still thinking I was going to run Hard Rock, but I've kind of accepted this as a year that's not about running. I am a runner and I identify as a runner, and it's something that's still huge to me. And I have a streak going on 5 years at this point, but this year is not about running. Mm-hmm. And this year I'm doing a ton on the work front, and I've just kind of accepted that. I did my only race that I'm signed up for the year. I did my trail running, fly fishing, Middle Creek Flyathlon 2 weekends ago, and had a blast doing that. I had won that combined event in the past, but I was horribly slow at fishing. So I took the extra time and won the biggest fish competition.
Is this going to be covered on ifishfar.com?
As soon as I roll that out, yes. But yeah, I don't have any running plans. I basically told myself I was taking a break. Even if I'm running every day, I told myself that in early June to stop fighting to get in shape when I'm just spending my time working and on other things. But I'm starting to play around with going from 2.5 miles to throwing in a couple 5-milers, or if a buddy wants to go 5 miles into a lake and fish and run back out, maybe I'll do that in the next couple of weeks. But just kind of allowing myself to play more with running over the coming months, in hopes of, I did my trail work for Hard Rock. I did my trail boss or trail crew leader thing at Hard Rock. I've got as many tickets as I can get in that lottery. And I hope to be able to build myself up if I get in to have a really good run there next year. But until then,
bro.
Yeah.
Let's
keep the dream alive.
And then UTMB, I'm assuming, is what's next for iRunFar?
Barring any changes in travel status, our plan is to be at UTMB. So we should be there. We plan to be at a bunch of other events in the fall. It is I don't think I can really name any because we haven't decided. There's a whole bunch that we'll probably decide in the next couple weeks.
Yeah,
it's who's actually going to show up.
Yeah, and there's a dearth of competitive races that have been moved from spring to fall.
So totally. So it's like, oh my God, who is actually going to show up to which are we going to be able to travel to? We've always kind of done that, especially for autumn races. Been really patient and even making decisions 2 or 3 weeks out, whether we go to an event to see how that field is actually shaping up. But there's a bunch that we're looking at. And I think, I'll probably meet with Megan as soon as we're done and talk about some of them again.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be able to sit down and turn the tables on you and learn a little bit more about this next chapter for iRunFar. Again, congratulations on the move, even though it was 6 months ago now. It seems like things are moving progressively forward into the future. And I am so glad to see your hard work rewarded. And thank you for everything you do for our community. And thanks for coming on the pod and talking about it.
Thank you, Dylan. It was a pleasure. And I hope we can do it again sometime.